Cool. Awesome. Hey, y'all, I'm Alexis, product designer in Plan. So I'm going to try to quickly talk through this. It's something I started recently ideating on, and I want to go over this quickly so we all have time to watch Austin and Daniel's awesome async presentations. All right, so I am working on something called work item hierarchy. And what I mean by that is basically the idea that users want to decompose projects, and I know that's a weird word, but decompose projects or goals, and then they want to visualize and organize that breakdown in a hierarchy. And they want to do that in this way because it really helps teams estimate work more accurately because the work is then smaller and more well scoped. It also helps everyone see how their work is contributing or cascading up, to use Nick's term as well, and how it's cascading towards these larger goals, which is really motivating to teams as they're working. They can see how their smaller items are contributing to something larger. And it also helps teams plan and understand, of course, like who's going to work on what and when. So you can see some of the jobs to be done I'm looking at here. We currently do allow users to break down goals using work items like epics and issues, and a thing called sort of a sub epic or a child epic that they can nest under epics. You can see some of that here. We also have items like requirements, test cases, incidents, soon tasks that Holly will be talking through. So these all allow users to create a sense of hierarchy while planning. Some teams may want to use different types of objects or work items, or they might call them different things. Like maybe they call it a feature instead of an epic. Depends on the framework they use. But the general idea is that goals are kind of different sizes and they have different levels of hierarchy, right? So some goals are large and they're more, I guess, stakeholder facing, right? That's kind of like an epic. Some goals are smaller and they're more team facing so that a team can understand what to work on and do that work, kind of like an issue. Or again, maybe some users might call that a story or a task or a ticket, but again, all kind of the same thing, just goals that you want to work on. So, call it different things, but the idea is the same. So you can see here how we do that currently within GitLab. This is how we allow users to create a sense of hierarchy in their work through things like epics and child epics or sub epics, and then issues. And then in the future, then like Holly will present maybe things like tasks or incidents. So that's our current state. We had a lot of feedback, however, that users don't fully understand what the intended hierarchy within GitLab or the breakdown structure within GitLab is. So, and this is further impacted by a lot of the things Nick already mentioned, like epic discoverability being hindered by them being in groups, and the idea of groups and projects in general. Users maybe not knowing they can nest epics, maybe users not understanding requirements or really knowing how to use them or where they are. So a lot of that kind of stuff. And again, I'm really excited by workspaces and some of the things we're ideating on there. I think that will also help with a lot of the work and plan. So thank you, Nick, for setting that up. But for us, the first step is really just addressing making our hierarchy or our structure more apparent to users. So that, educating users on what is possible, what the current status of their work items is within their groups and projects. Where are things? How are they supposed to be nested? Are they even on or not? Because users can turn things on and off like issues. So I did a lot of quick ideation here. This was a fairly quick exercise, I guess. And I really wanted to go through things like some of these things here. Moving configuration out of settings, kind of like I mentioned before, you can turn items off, usually within settings, and it's a little inconsistent there. So, what would it look like if we took some of these items outside of settings, made it more contextual? You can configure things more contextually. Could we educate users on the hierarchy? How are we going to do that within the section? How do we enable customization of hierarchy maybe, or maybe customization of work items, toggling them on and off, disabling them within, again, the section. How do we display relationships between these items? Getting into kind of like data modeling, which is confusing to me, as you can see with this, this little thing here, like the one-to-many, many-to-one, one-to-one relationships of these items. Requirements, things like better integrating items like requirements into the hierarchy. So how do we display items that are not within the hierarchy, like I guess really requirements and test cases at the moment. And then kind of the idea of, and I want to talk with Jackie and the growth team about this in the future, but displaying features that aren't available to users and educating them on these without it feeling too upsell-y. And then also things like integrating feedback or like soliciting feedback within these features themselves. So I went through a lot of different directions here, but we only have about 1 point of engineering effort to dedicate to this for this milestone. So we obviously want to keep this change very, very, very small and front-end only if possible. So, and next, because of that, I next want to continue validating this idea that we've come up with and further exploring objectives like what is the user's mental model around some of the labeling here. There's a lot of terms floating around, kind of like I mentioned earlier, in planning. So, we have the SAFE framework, we have different agile planning methods. There's features, there's the work breakdown structure and the value breakdown structure. There's all sorts of stuff. So what do users expect to see here? How do we speak their language? And kind of how do we allow them to customize that language if we want to be flexible? I want to continue validating where users expect to access this information or some of the information that might have historically lived in settings and kind of breaking that out. Continue validating the usability, educating users on, again, kind of what I mentioned before, like how do we upsell without upselling, like make it more about educating people on what's possible. And then also the best way to ask for feedback within this item itself. And then there's a lot of future state kind of things we'd like to do that I sort of touched on before, but things like customizing this hierarchy, customizing the work items themselves. Like I mentioned before, maybe they don't want to call this an issue, they want to call it a story. Or maybe they want the story or the issue to contain different kinds of attributes. Like how do we allow them to configure this? And then this could also become sort of like a workflow rules and automation area. So, maybe when it leaves the to-do column, there's a set of like rules that triggers, things like that. And how do we allow users to customize that? And like some users actually want to break work items down in a visual way like this and kind of call the work breakdown structure. So investigating how we might allow them to do that as well, kind of like those different views that users can view their work items. So lots of stuff there that I want to continue working on. And then also we want to integrate learnings here into future, I guess what I'm calling widgets, because we've been talking about widgets a lot lately. We're going to be working on how to best translate this hierarchy or the breakdown within work items like epics and issues themselves. So the first step here could be just improving our current epic true widget. And then next would be perhaps expanding this area into maybe a sort of widget to view and edit relationships in dependencies like across all work items, and maybe even rolling merge requests into that. So you can really see and map out all the dependencies and relationships between all work items. So that's a lot. And that's why I've not dove into this at the moment, but we'll get there. But yeah, we'll get there in a future showcase. That was the showcase. Thanks all for listening. Hopefully I kept that short enough that we have time to watch the other presentations. Thanks. Is there any questions?
Thanks, Alexis. Actually, it leaves us even more time for questions and comments. Jackie, do you want to make a connection real quick here?
I mean, my comment is just, you could read it. Just, you mentioned talking to us in growth about teaching customers about features without, being upselly or being obnoxious. And so Kevin is actually our expert on this, and we're working on a bunch of things. We have lots of ideas planned. And we would love to work with you on it. So let's talk soon.
Awesome. I'm excited. Yeah, like I said, we're just keeping this super duper small, but I'm really excited to work with Kevin in the future.
Austin, what's your question?
Yeah, Alexis, I wanted to get your perspective as you were kind of walking through the hierarchy page as you had kind of outlined it in the GitLab UI. What makes something a good candidate to go inside GitLab versus just documenting it in our docs or maybe in pajamas or somewhere else? I
think it's kind of the goal, like the goal aspect I mentioned. So if you think about Epic's like stakeholder facing goals, like I said before, that this is this large thing we want to work on, and then smaller work items like issues are the actual piece of work that's being implemented. I think if you go even higher than that, where you're kind of collaborating maybe on like a canvas or a strategy, I think, or like documenting single source of truth that you don't want to disappear at all. Like that's kind of where I would imagine wiki or docs. And I know Michael's been doing a lot of work here, but like honestly, that's so interesting you asked that, because I feel like that's something I really miss sometimes at GitLab, is the idea of a doc, and maybe starting at an even higher level than we're sometimes able to, and collaborating at that high level. So I think it's like you're not really working on something yet. You're discussing and collaborating on it at a really, really high level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a little bit it did. I think where I'm hung up is I feel like I've built a mental model of the hierarchy of these objects in GitLab in my head. So when I see it appear in the GitLab app, I'm like, I feel like this is a documentation page that's appearing inside GitLab, but maybe I'm just not fully understanding the vision of like the way that teams might collaborate to maybe customize that hierarchy.
So you mean like the hierarchy page itself, you would imagine? Yeah, so me too, honestly, I kind of pushed back on this and I was like, so why isn't this a docs page? And I think it should be, right? And we do have documentation here, especially around how do I kind of translate the way I'm working into GitLab, for example, right? Like, so maybe users that use competitor products have a different way of working, and we try to educate them on how to fit that into the hierarchy we sort of prescribe, right? So we have a lot of things like that. And I think, honestly, kind of like I said for MVC here, to keep it really, really small, it is kind of really just education to start out with. And then we're enriching it with some of the feature items I mentioned, like making it more customizable, and maybe editing the work items themselves. So for MVC, yes, it is more of an educational kind of object here, and a way to solicit feedback and really just help users understand like the status of the hierarchy and work items, just for MVC. But yeah, good question. I kind of had the same question, but the vision is to make this a way to configure things like hierarchy and work items.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for entertaining it. I think Jackie's idea to like work with growth would be great too, because I'm sure they also deal with that like tension of how much is too much in the product and trying to balance the documentation versus like the user guidance. All good things. So thanks again.
Great. Good thing we got a lot of awesome writers, as we just saw in the last presentation, to help us out with this. So yeah, thanks for your question.
Thanks so much, Alexis, and great questions and connections already. Time for us to move on